For hundreds of years, theologians and scholars, they have called the book of Ephesians the Alps of the New Testament. And the reason they've called it that is because in so many ways, the book of Ephesians is like climbing a mountain. And the further you get up a mountain, the greater your perspective becomes. Out of curiosity, show of hands, is there anyone here today and you just love climbing mountains? You love to summit mountains. Is there any crazy people here? Okay, there's a few of you. I had coffee with a guy last week at Lionheart, and he was telling me about what he likes to do with as far as climbing mountains. He's like uber adventurous. He did Everest a couple years ago, and he's like, hey, Dom, next year in June, I'm going to be climbing Mount Shasta all the way to the top. And he said, you got to come with me. And so he's trying to persuade me to go with him. And I'm like, what's it like? He said, it's just insane. 48 hours, no sleep, no oxygen, freezing cold, high winds. You'll probably die. I'm like, you must hate my sermons or something. But he said, no, when you get to the top of a mountain, it is the most exhilarating, beautiful thing you could ever imagine, the perspective that it gives you. And I think that's why people have called Ephesians the Alps of the New Testament, because it gives you a unique perspective, gives you a view of God and his heart and his passion for us and for the world. And to refresh your memory, because we started a couple months ago, back in chapter 1, remember how Paul, he talks about the story of the gospel, and he opens it up by saying, God has blessed us in the heavenly realms with every spiritual blessing in Jesus. In other words, because of the gospel, we are now part of the family of God. We're his daughters and sons. We're forgiven. And Paul makes this whole argument in chapter 1. He says that the wall that used to separate us from God has been torn down. And then he takes it a step further. In chapter 2, it's all about the unity that we experience with one another. So he says, okay, because we have unity with God, we also can experience unity with one another, that all the divisions that we have and all the ways that we try and separate ourselves or push people away from us, because of the gospel, those walls have been torn down. Remember how we talked about in chapter 2 that in first century culture, there were tons of walls and barriers between people, racism and sexism and injustice. And Paul says, those walls, he has destroyed them through the cross, through the finished work. He has now brought us together. And that's what I love about church. Church is this beautiful mosaic of people, of young and old and different backgrounds and different stories. Doesn't matter if you're black or white or Asian or Hispanic or Republican or Democrat, urban, suburban, Starbucks or barista. It doesn't matter. We're all part of this family of God. We've all been drawn together. And then in chapter 3, Paul now unpacks this beautiful theme of grace. And remember last week, he said that grace is a mystery. He uses this fascinating word, mystery, which means something hidden, but that has now been revealed. And how grace is subversive and surprising and counterintuitive. How grace is the exact opposite of what we think religion ought to be. Religion says, the only way you can get close to God is by doing more. But grace says, no, God has come close to you in Jesus. Religion is all about barriers and boundaries and trying to determine who's in and who's out. But grace abolishes the boundaries and says all are welcome into the family of God. Religion says that your dirt keeps you from God. But grace says that God has reached into the dirt of your life and he has resurrected you. He has made you into a new creation. Paul, chapter after chapter, line upon line, he's revealing the heart of God. He's taking us higher. He's leading us up a mountain. And again, those of you who are crazy and you love to summit mountains, you know that feeling you get when you're at the top of the mountain, when you've accomplished that goal. It's like this exhilaration and, oh, I've accomplished the goal. And it's almost like this inspirational, spiritual moment where you just want to worship God. And I share that because That's what Paul does at the end here of chapter 3. He's taken us up the mountain, he's enlarged our perspective, and now Paul begins to worship. Look how he begins. Verse 14. He says, "For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. And I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Jesus, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God." Verse 20, "Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever." And everyone said, Amen. Amen. Paul begins by saying, "For this reason, I kneel before the Father." This was surprising because in first century religious culture, whenever you prayed, you would generally stand. Standing was a way to show respect to God. The only time that you would kneel would be if you were overcome with emotion. If something was happening in your life that was so intense that you really had no other choice. And I want you to imagine, go back in time 2,000 years. Paul is in the city of Rome. He's in chains, literally, he's in chains under house arrest. There was a Roman guard that was watching over him. And for 3 chapters, he was writing and thinking and processing and unpacking God. He's taking us further up the mountain. And then at the end of chapter 3, Paul says, "For this reason, I kneel before God the Father." And he's not just writing this, he's literally kneeling before God. And the Roman guard's like, "What is going on here?" He's kneeling before God because he's so overcome with emotion and passion. He's gotten a glimpse of the summit of the mountain, and he cannot believe how beautiful God is. Our theology, if it's not leading us to a greater amount of worship and passion and intensity and devotion, if our theology isn't producing that kind of change in us, if it's not leading to worship, then something is wrong with our theology. Because we can study week in, week out, we can go through books of the Bible, we can listen to podcasts and sermons and all of that. But if our heart isn't more in love with Jesus, if we're not being changed and transformed by the Spirit, then what are we doing? We're just becoming Pharisees. Are you more in love with Jesus now than you were a year ago? Are you more passionate about the gospel than you were a year ago? Is there this sense where I've climbed the mountain, oh, I just want to worship you? You know, C.S. Lewis, he has this great book. It's called The Great Divorce. And The Great Divorce, he tells a story of a group of tourists who are taking a bus tour of hell. And he describes the sights and the sounds of hell. And at one point, if you've read the book, you know, they see a theologian who's in hell. And they stop the bus and they start to talk to him like, "Hey, what are you doing in hell? First of all, that's weird. And why don't you get on board the bus and we'll take you to heaven?" And it's brilliant because the theologian, he's like, "Well, you know, I actually I know it sounds weird, but I enjoy it down here." And they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" He says, "Yeah, you know, I started a theological society, and we had these deep theological conversations. In fact, next week, I am so excited. I'm going to be giving a paper on the Trinity, and they've got all this stuff going on, so sorry I can't get on the bus and join you to heaven." Now, what's C.S. Lewis doing there? This is the brilliant part. Well, first of all, keep in mind, when he wrote this, he was living in Oxford, England, surrounded by theologians. And so it's kind of his subtle way of making some enemies. But also he's making the point, it is so possible to know a ton about God, but not really know God. It is possible to have all kinds of information, but if you have not love, it profits nothing. What are we doing? We're just a bunch of porcupines that have many fine points, but we're impossible to touch, right? Something was happening in Paul's heart where learning about God was creating worship of God. Richard Foster put it this way. He said, worship is our response to the overtures of love from the Father. That is why what we do after our gatherings is vital, so important. That's why coming to the table, responding through song and lifting our hands or bowing our knees, this is a way for us to take content and information and actually create transformation. For this reason, I kneel before the Father. And then he says, I'm praying for you. What is Paul praying? A few things if you're taking notes. Number one, Paul says, I am praying for the power of the Spirit. Look at verse 16. I pray that he would strengthen you with power through his Spirit. Interesting prayer. I was thinking about it this last week because technically, the believers in Ephesus already had the Holy Spirit. And we don't have time, that's a whole other sermon. The Bible says so. Whenever anyone comes to Jesus, the Spirit of God comes in you. But here's the deal. You may, quote, have the Spirit, but the Spirit doesn't always have you. I've been married for 16 years. I wear the ring. I love my wife. But just because I'm married to her doesn't, like any relationship, doesn't always mean there won't be problems and issues. Sometimes there's tension or conflict. And I like the house Arctic and she likes it 70 degrees, Maui style. Like there will be issues, there will be problems. And in our relationship with God, there are times where honestly, there's some wall, there's some separation between me and God. And we'll see in January, Paul says in Ephesians 4, do not grieve the Spirit of God, which implies there are times when we can grieve the Spirit of God, which is why, personally, this is just a practice of mine. I'm always just praying for the power of the Spirit on my life. This morning, before I was teaching the 8 a.m., I'm like, God, I prayed this, fill me with the power of your Spirit. I cannot do this on my own. I don't have what it takes to do this on my own. I need your strength and joy and power upon my life. Paul says, that's what I'm praying for you. He says to the Ephesians, I know y'all have the Holy Spirit, because Paul was from the South. He could say that. Y'all have the Spirit, but he says, I'm praying for more of the Spirit on your life. Number two, Paul not only prays for the Holy Spirit on them, he prays that Jesus would dwell in their hearts. Verse 17. And if you're a note taker, grab a pen, and if you're not a note taker, grab your neighbor's pen. This is so worth writing down. That Jesus would dwell. The word dwell is the word katoikeo. Can I hear you say katoikeo? It means reside, to live in, or to settle. Katoikeo was used in the first century to describe when you made a house a home. It was used to describe when the whole place was yours. You could go anywhere in the house. You knew the house backwards and forwards. You knew what was in the closets and cupboards and in the basement. That house was more than just a house. It was your own. Paul uses this word, which ironically, again, he's under house arrest in Rome. What did that mean? It meant that Paul was in chains, we talked about last week. He was confined either to a closet, they would do that sometimes, or to a room. He was not allowed to go anywhere else. It was his house, but he was restricted to a room. And Paul uses this word and he says, I am praying that Jesus would be at home in your heart. What's the difference between just going over to someone's house versus a place that is your own? You go over to someone's house as a guest, okay, you're careful not to touch things, or you take off your shoes and you don't want to, infringe or you don't want to look in other rooms. You just go where they tell you to go, right? But if it's your house, it's a different experience. Go home, get in your pajamas, go downstairs, open the freezer, grab a bowl of peppermint, Tillamook ice cream. You sit on the couch, put your feet up, watch Elf for the 40th time, because it's your house, it's your place. Is is Jesus at home in your heart? Or are there places of your life where you've said, okay, stay here, but I'm not letting you look in that closet. You can't go down the basement. I'm not going to uncover that part of my life. Okay, God, you can have Sunday mornings, but Friday night's kind of my thing. You can have this part of my life, but the way I handle that relationship or those decisions, that's kind of my deal. Is Jesus at home in your heart? Or do you have a fragmented faith? Is there some disconnect between who you say God is in one category, in one setting, but the way you live it out is something totally different? You know, I did my undergrad in psychology, and in the world of psychology, what they tell you is that it is actually dangerous and very unhealthy to have a fragmented life. The word they use for it is disassociation. That disassociation is where you're not allowing some areas of your life to correspond with others. You're repressing certain things. You have one personality in one setting and another personality in another. And what they say with disassociation is that it can actually lead to mental unhealth. It can lead to instability. And I began to do some research on this, and I came across an article. You can look it up if you want. It's bizarre, really bizarre. True story of a woman in Wisconsin. Her name is Naden Cool, and I'll just read it to you. It says, she sued her former psychiatrist because he convinced her that she had more than 100 personalities, and then he billed her for group therapy. So it's like this kind of brilliant move. He's like, your multi-personality disorder, you have over 100. He billed her $300,000. And some of the personalities he told her that she had included Satan. How would you like to be told that that's one of your personalities? Which is me like at 6 a.m. And another, he said, angels. There's an angel in you. And then, this is weird. He said, the third one is a duck. I don't even know what to do. It explains the bill, I guess. So bad. Ugh. I can't help it. It's like the Spirit of God just comes on me with these words. So in psychology, they say this is so unhealthy. Fragmenting your life, disassociation, it leads to instability. And Paul, he's using the same language. He's saying, I am praying that the Spirit of God would have such control over your life where there is nothing that you're holding back from him, where you're giving him access to your life, your past, your present, your future, your secrets, your heartache, your pain, the junk from your past, where the Spirit of God can come in and bring healing. So Paul is on his knees in Rome saying, I worship God and I pray for more of the Spirit on your life. I pray that God would be at home in your heart. And then thirdly, he says, I am praying that you would grasp the love of God. Oh my goodness, check this out. Verse 17, he says, I pray that you, being rooted, established in love, may have power to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Jesus. This is so incredible. The word grasp, he says, I pray that you would grasp God's love. It's a fascinating word. It's the word kata lambano. Can I hear you say kata lambano? And it means to seize something, to attain it, to apprehend it. They used the word kata lambano in the first century to describe Olympic runners who were on the last leg of the track, and they see the prize. They see the finish line, and when they cross that line, they grasp the prize. And it was not just like some lighthearted, oh, cool. No, they're holding on to it. They're holding it close to their chest. That prize belonged to them. It was theirs alone. And when Paul says, I'm praying that you would grasp the love of God, he's saying, I pray that you would have the kind of faith that is your own, Too many people outsource their faith. They believe because, well, maybe their parents believe, or some of the friends around them believe, or they come to church and they feel spiritual because it's a spiritual experience, but it's not their own. It hasn't really changed them. It's kind of like the difference between digital photography versus film, vintage style photography. So I have my iPhone here, and with this iPhone, I can take pictures of y'all. Here we go. I can take a picture over here. Peace. That's a little aloha. Yep, there we go. Now, I can go home, and I can take dozens of pictures, and I can begin to go through these photos, and I can keep some, I can delete some. I'm like, okay, oh, wow, he's asleep. Okay, let's get rid of that one, right? It's the marvel of digital photography. You can take as many photos as you want, and you can delete as many as you want, and it's as if it never existed. Now, for those of you who are into photography, maybe you're into film photography, you know the way it works. Well, it's a different thing entirely. When you have a vintage film camera, this is a camera, check it out. It's a Kodak camera from the 1940s. It's so cool, I love it. And the way this thing works, it's just a work of art in and of itself. You have film inside, and then you have this little viewfinder thing, and you see the people there, so I can see you on the front row, and then you adjust this little knob here, and you make some changes, and then you press the button, and what happens? Light comes into the camera, and then it goes back to the film that's on the camera, and the film is coated with these chemicals. And what happens is it kind of grips the image. The image literally is impressed on the film. The film is changed, it's transformed. Even if you don't like the picture, too bad, it's stuck, right? It's there forever. And when Paul says, I want you to grasp the love of God, this isn't iPhone photography. It's not like, okay, I kind of get it, but really I'm deleting it from my life. It's not that big a deal. It's just a Sunday morning experience or whatever. No, he's saying, I want you to have the kind of relationship with God where His light has come into your heart, and it's imaging you, it's changing you, it's transforming you, where God's Spirit is now messing with you in the best possible way, and it's leading to changes in how you treat your wife, and your ethic at work, and your generosity, and how you love your neighbors and your city, because you have grasped it, you have seized it. You have katalambanoed the love of God. And the beauty of the gospel is not just that we need to grasp His love. The real message of the gospel is that God has grasped us. Jesus was the runner. Jesus came to earth. He pursued us. Hebrews says, for the joy that was set before Him, He endured the cross. He pursued us. We have been katalambanoed by Jesus. Romans 5:8 says, God demonstrates His own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Can you see why Paul is literally on his knees worshiping God? God's image had been imprinted on his heart in such a way that his life was changed. The Spirit of God had come upon him in such a way that the way he saw the world and others was changed. His perspective had gone higher. He's on the mountain. He's worshiping. He's praising. Perhaps tears in his eyes. Jesus had transformed him. And that's why he closes with these words. Now to Him, verse 20, who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us. To Him be glory forever and ever. Check this out. The more that Paul was grasped by the love of God, the more he realized how indescribably beautiful God is. He is able, if you have a pen, circle the word immeasurable. He is able to do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine. That word means beyond all comprehension, limitless, infinite. That's the God we serve. That's the view from the mountain. It's a God who is boundless, inexhaustible, unending, who defies the boxes that we try to put him into. And we always try and put God in boxes. And the last time someone put him in one, he broke out 3 days later, right? He's always doing more than we could ask, think, or imagine. Paul in Romans 11, it's a very, very similar text. He says, how great are the depths of God's riches and wisdom. How impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways. Isaiah, one of my favorite Old Testament passages, says, for just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. Isaiah, he says, do you want to get just a glimpse of how beautiful the love of God is? He says, look up. Look to the heavens. And it's true. Those of you who are kind of nerdy like me and you love science and you love studying NASA and all that, you know that the universe, the more that we study it, the more incomprehensibly vast and beautiful it is. I was reading NASA just a couple days ago, and they had this incredible article, so epic. It was talking about the expanding universe. So that's the universe we live in. It's constantly growing, constantly expanding. And what they now say is that the edge of the observable universe is 46 billion light years away. And here's the deal. It's expanding faster than the speed of light, which is technically impossible. But that's the universe we live in. Faster than the speed of light, 46 billion miles away. It's growing, it's expanding. Now, what's it expanding into? That's a whole different question, right? And what they're discovering is that the universe is not just further out than we ever imagined, but it's also more dense than we could possibly imagine. And this was the whole point of the article. They say this year, based on new technology, that the universe is far denser, and you can pick virtually any point in the universe, and they say there are now 10 times more galaxies than we previously thought. So you look at any point in the universe, you zoom it in, whoa, there are 10 times more galaxies. And in each of the galaxies, they're discovering supernovas and clusters and solar systems and all kinds of epic stars and planets. The scale that we're talking about, this immeasurably large universe, is truly incomprehensibly vast. I started to refresh myself on this just to get a picture of how vast it is. So here's the slide. This kind of shows us how we compare just to the other planets in our solar system. You all seen images like this. So Earth is that little blue marble at the bottom. And you just look at how we're dwarfed by Jupiter and Saturn. Unbelievable. But that's nothing in comparison to the size of our own sun. Now, we're in Portland. We don't know what that is. But trust me on this. We're that tiny dot at the bottom. There's our sun. Do you know you could fit 1.3 million Earths inside the sun? It's incomprehensibly huge. And we think, whoa, that's massive. That's nothing in comparison to some of the stars now that we are finding. In fact, just recently, I say we, they, one of the most recent is the Canis Majoris. It is so huge that it just breaks the scale. There's no way to even describe it. See that little yellow dot? That's our sun. The Canis Majoris is this star that they call a red hypergiant, and it's 5.46 billion miles around. It would take a jet 1,100 years to go around Canis Majoris just once. It's so huge. But that's nothing compared to a more recent discovery. Check out this one. It's no moon, right? So the universe we're talking about is so vast, it is so incomprehensibly large that the more we discover it, oh my gosh, we had no idea. The boundaries of our knowledge are constantly being pushed further and further away. And that doesn't even include dark matter and dark energy and theories of multiverse. It's incredible. And Isaiah says, you want to get a sense, you want to get just a glimpse of how epically beautiful our God is? Look to the heavens. Look at how beautiful this world that God has made. And it's not just the telescope, it's the microscope and biodiversity. The more we learn, the more we study, the more we realize how beautiful God's creation is. And that is why Christians, more than any other group, should be so excited about science, because the more we learn about God's creation, the more we learn about God's creativity and beauty. And so Paul, he says, God is able to do abundantly, exceedingly more than we could ask or think or imagine. And here's the beautiful thing. The same God who made all of this is passionately in love with you. In the book of Psalms, David said, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers. I just love that line. Canis majoris, the work of his fingers. Like, dink, there it is, right? The work of your fingers. The moon and the stars and the Death Stars, which you have set in place. What is mankind that you are mindful of him? Check this out. Christianity teaches us that the same creative, innovative, redemptive God who made all the world is intimately involved in the details of your life. Jesus said, don't you know? Your Father, he's aware, even when a sparrow falls to the ground, he knows the number of hairs that you have on your head. Our God is so in love with us. And here's the deal. If you believe in a God like that, if you believe in a God who is able to do abundantly, exceedingly more than you could ask, think, or imagine, doesn't it change everything? I mean, that's why Paul, even though he's in prison, in chains, could go on his knees and start to worship, because he has such a big view of God that was bigger than his own hard circumstances. That's why he could begin the book of Ephesians and say all things are being brought together under Jesus. If you see a God, if you believe in a God like that, then what that means is that which is over my head, the problems that are over my head, are under his feet. If you believe in a God of Ephesians 3:20, it will transform everything. You don't have to be afraid. And what these verses have been doing, this last week especially, as I've been thinking it through and praying it through, it's really been messing with me in a good way. And it's kind of been convicting. What these verses have done have exposed the superficial, shallow, restricted ways that I think of God. And what I've come to realize is when we have a limited view of God, we will have a limited view of life. And when we have a limited view of life, we begin to put barriers up. We start to believe lies. We're unwilling to take steps of faith. We start to believe things that the enemy starts to whisper in our ear, like, I could never be used by God because of my past or because of my mistakes. There's no way that he would want to use me in his kingdom. Or, I'll never be free of this addiction. I'll never be able to shake this sin. I've had it for years, and there's no way I'll be able to kick it in the future. You put up a boundary. You build a wall. Or, I will never be able to forgive what he did to me. Or there is no way that my friend will come to faith. She's so far gone. There's just no way. It's impossible. Or I'm always going to be stuck in this dead-end job. There's no way I'll be able to do something different. It's just the path that I have to walk. Or if you're married, this marriage will always stink. It's always going to be hard. There's no way that he will be this way or she will be that way. And you build a wall. You draw a line in the sand. Or if you're single, there's no way I'll ever find the one. I've been looking, I've been searching. I'm single. I don't even know how to mingle, right? And we build these walls. And we put up these defenses. And we tell ourselves these lies. And here's the deal. It's because my vision of God and your vision of God isn't big enough. You know, Copernicus, when he first began to discover how vast the universe was in the 1500s, he starts to learn, oh my gosh, we're not the center of the universe. We're actually revolving around the sun. He put forward this theory, the heliocentric view of the universe. And you guys know this. There were many who opposed him. In fact, tragically, some in the Catholic Church began to oppose him too. And there are people saying, no, this is a lie. This is heresy. We are the center of the universe. And he's like, well, that's not what I'm learning. It's actually way bigger than that. But there was a guy who was one of his biggest advocates. You got to check out his story sometime. He was an Italian monk, and his name was Bruno, which is an epic name. If you're going to be a monk, just call yourself Bruno. Bruno, the Italian monk, he said, you know what? What Copernicus is saying, I agree with it. And he began to share and talk about it and write about it. He said, Copernicus is right, not just scientifically, I see that, but he is right theologically, because what he's describing, the universe that he's describing, well, it lines up with what I am seeing about this God. That the universe is expanding, it's huge, it's vast, it's complex, and so too this God that I love, he's vast and huge and beautiful and bigger than my limitations. The Catholic Church at that time, 1500s, they said that's a lie, and they put him on trial for heresy. Bruno, the Italian monk, stands trial. They condemn him to death. And his final words in that courtroom was this: your God is too small. I just wonder this afternoon, could that be true of us? I know that's true of me. I know in my life, I so often have a shallow, superficial, restricted, anemic, claustrophobic view of who God is and what he wants to do in my life. And what Ephesians 3 does is it blows the lid off all of that. It takes me up the mountain. It asks me the question, what would your life look like if you believed in an immeasurable God? How would you live? What would it look like if you climbed the mountain and actually saw who God was? What would it look like if you believed in the God of the impossible? You know what? I think we would worship more. Like Paul, for this reason I bow my knee. I think when we worship, it wouldn't just be rehearsing and singing lyrics on a screen. It'd be more passionate. It'd be more heartfelt. We'd worship more. We would pray more. And not only would we pray more, we would pray insane, huge, big prayers because, okay, I believe in a big God. He's taking me up the mountain. I'm getting a glimpse of who he is. And I realize the limitlessness of his nature and character and the beauty of his love. And so I need to pray big prayers. What would it look like for you to pray the kinds of prayers that if someone was eavesdropping on you, they would think, you've lost your mind. You're praying for that? Are you kidding me? What would it look like to believe in the impossible, to have faith in what God can do in your marriage? Maybe there's some here, you've put up walls to your spouse. You've assumed that it's always going to be the same. You've had a low bar expectation of what your marriage can look like. And what if God's saying, no, you need to raise the bar way higher. Climb the mountain. Get a glimpse of who I am. Believe in what I can do. Some of us, we've been stuck in a rut in our relationship with God, and it's because we've been hanging out in the lowlands. We've been hanging out in the valley, and the Spirit of God is saying, I want to take you so much further and higher. What would you do? How would you live if Ephesians 3:20 wasn't just words on a page, but it was something that was imprinted like film, imprinted on your heart, I think we would take more steps of faith. What is that thing in your life? You've been telling yourself, and I'll do that someday. It's a dream, it's a passion I have, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but you've been saying that for 5 or 10 years. I think you would be willing now, today, this week, let's do this. I'm going to give that up. I'm going to take that step. I'm going to make that call. I'm going to engage in that conversation. I think we would love our neighbors better. I think we'd love our city better. I think we'd fight for justice and compassion and the love of God in our city. If you believe in an immeasurable God, you will lead an invaluable life. Now to him who is able to do abundantly, exceedingly in your singleness, in your finances, in your family, in our church, more than we could ask or think or imagine. It was the same Paul who wrote in Romans 8, he said, if God be for us, who can be against us? Okay, could we just say that verse out loud? Let's just read it. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. If God is for us, who can be against us? Westside family, God is for you. I know you all believe that God is with you, but God is for you. That's what Ephesians is all about. He is for you. How do I know? Well, we're coming to the table in just a few minutes. I know that because the love of God, the height, the depth, the breadth, the width. At the cross, I see the height. He was high and lifted up. At the cross, I see the width as his hands were pinned to a Roman cross. At the cross, I see the depth of God's love, that he was the lamb that was slain before the foundations of the world. When I grasp the love of God and I know who he is and I catch a glimpse of his majesty, then I want to live the kind of life that has Ephesians 3 written all over it. How would you live your life? How would you live this week if you believed that that verse was true?